Hey everyone, welcome back to day 5 of Walking in Wisdom, where I cover a chapter of Proverbs every day for the entire month of 2020. And you know what? One of these days I might even be out walking, but not today because it's rainy in Florida. Anyway, so chapter 5 continues with Solomon addressing his son, and this time he's talking about the dangers of adultery and being seduced. And he gives advice about how to avoid it. Simply put, he says, avoid it, don't go there, don't go by her house or her street or neighborhood, just avoid any temptation that you possibly can. But also in this chapter, he ultimately praises a faithful relationship between a husband and his one wife. And he begins by talking about lips, which are very helpful when it comes to talking. And he says, "My son, be attentive to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may keep discretion, and your lips may guard knowledge. For the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword." As a father, Solomon is trying to teach his son the goal of good judgment when seduction is on the line. And he's teaching about how knowledge of God's truth is to be spoken in real-life situations, which is why it's so important to read God's word so that it can be in your hearts and on your tongue. This is contrasted by what the adulteress is being described as here in verses 3 to 7, because though her lips and words drip of honey, she in the end is bitter like wormwood. She's living outside the moral boundaries that God has set for his people, and what she promises is very different from what she actually delivers, because she gives no thought to her actions or the consequences. So Solomon encourages his son to completely avoid the temptation. So fun fact, they live in an arid climate. So whenever you have your own water source in an arid climate, this is a blessing. So because of this, Solomon describes a relationship between a wife and a husband as somebody that has their own water source, their own well or a cistern or a fountain, and these are things to be cherished and protected from others. So Solomon describes a relationship with one wife, singular, in the terms of water. And he says this: "Drink from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad and streams of water in the streets, let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth." So because of this, the relationship and intimacy between spouses improves as years go by, as you learn how to better communicate as you spend time with each other. Now, this is part of the beauty of the marriage design that God has for us. It's also kind of fun too, because Linda and I are about to celebrate our 5th anniversary, so we too are learning how to better communicate and improve in our relationship. Now later on, Solomon finishes out the chapter with a warning for a person who becomes ensnared in adultery, or for any sin really, that their iniquities will find a way to trap. So Solomon exposes both the habitual nature of the particular sins and their accompanying tangled web of deception and destructive consequences that not only he learned, but also his father David learned. What's fantastic is so much of God's teaching of the law is expose. And it's fantastic because God shows us what sin looks like, it shows us why we sin, and where sin will take us. And that's exactly what Solomon is doing with his son. He gives him a vivid look at the road to and from adultery, and what's more, he shows the sheer joy of deep, lasting intimacy within marriage. Sin is never just a moral lapse or an isolated infraction of one of God's commandments. Its consequences lead ultimately to death. How many of us might have been spared a horrific aftermath of sin if only we looked beyond the sin to its actual consequences? Fortunately, the gospel of Jesus Christ motivates us to take the higher road so that we honor faithfulness in marriage and in all our relationships because of Him who is faithful to us in all things. So we get wiser when we hear His word. We get wiser when we listen to God's understanding. And we look to Him, to Christ, who was the fulfillment of all things, as our example. So with that, I say keep reading, and I'll see you tomorrow for chapter 6. Have a great day.